It was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives. But by dawn, the presidential suite of the Madison Grand Hotel looked like a war zone. Detective Samuel Hayes got the call just before sunrise, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even hang up. Bride found dead. Groom in shock. Madison Grand, top floor. The dispatcher's voice was flat, but the words carried a weight that settled in Hayes' gut as he drove through the quiet streets of downtown Madison. When he arrived, the hotel's marble columns glimmered under the first streaks of orange light. Patrol cars lined the entrance, red and blue flashing across glass doors where wedding decorations still hung. The lobby smelled faintly of roses and champagne, the leftovers of what had been a celebration just hours earlier. Detective Hayes, over here. A young officer guided him to the elevator. 12th floor, presidential suite. The elevator ride was silent except for the hum of machinery and the faint ringing in his ears. Hayes had seen his share of murders, bar fights gone wrong, domestic disputes, greed turning violent. But a bride killed on her wedding night? That was new. The suite door was propped open. Inside, the contrast was almost cinematic, luxury meeting horror. The room was massive, framed by tall windows that offered a perfect view of Lake Mendota bathed in morning light. White petals were scattered across the carpet, mixed with shards of broken glass. One champagne flute lay on its side, a thin trail of golden liquid staining the carpet. And in the middle of it all lay Lena Brooks, 21 years old, the bride who never made it to her honeymoon. Her silk nightgown was torn, her dark hair tangled, her face streaked with blood. There were bruises on her arms and neck, the kind that speak of struggle. Beside her, the lamp was shattered, the cord twisted. On the nightstand, an iPhone with a cracked screen still blinked weakly, the wallpaper showing a wedding photo taken less than 12 hours ago. Hayes crouched beside the body. Time of death. Forensics says between midnight and 2, replied Sergeant Miller, the first officer on scene. The husband's in the next room. Found him sitting beside her, covered in blood. Didn't resist. Just kept saying, she cheated on me. The detective's eyes traveled around the room. Overturned nightstand, champagne bottle half empty, bed sheets smeared with blood. A wedding dress hung neatly on a rack near the wall, its pristine white lace untouched by the chaos. The irony wasn't lost on him. Who found them? The maid, Maria Lopez, Miller said, flipping his notebook. She heard screaming, thought it was, newlyweds. Then she heard a crash, a woman's voice screaming something about messages. Called security. They entered together. Hayes took a slow breath, pulling on his gloves. Let's talk to her next. Downstairs, Maria's hands trembled as she spoke, her voice thin and uneven. I heard him shouting, sir. He said, I saw the messages. And she said, you've got it all wrong. Then something broke. I knocked, no answer. I ran for help. The security guard, Tony Harris, added his part. When we got in, he was sitting there, staring at his hands. Blood everywhere. Didn't even look at us. Just kept whispering it. She cheated on me. Like he was trapped in some nightmare. Back upstairs, Hayes stood in the doorway of the adjoining suite. The groom sat on the edge of the bed, wrists cuffed, tuxedo shirt wrinkled and stained red. His name was Marcus Bennett, 30 years old, a successful financial consultant, at least on paper. He looked hollow, like someone who had burned through every emotion and found only emptiness left. Mr. Bennett. Hayes began quietly. I'm Detective Hayes. Can you tell me what happened? Marcus lifted his head. His eyes were unfocused, glassy. She was cheating on me, he muttered. My best friend. She lied to me. Hayes didn't push. Not yet. He'd learned long ago that the first version of a story is rarely the real one. He walked back into the suite and looked again at the scene. 2 champagne glasses. One broken. A phone with a shattered screen. A note tucked under the lamp base. A receipt from the hotel bar. Timestamp 11:58 p.m. The detective exhaled slowly, feeling that familiar chill run up his spine. The one that told him this was no simple crime of passion. A young bride dead. A husband 2 days to remember. And somewhere between love and betrayal, a secret waiting to be uncovered. Hayes glanced once more at the lifeless woman on the carpet, the lace veil tangled around her wrist, and thought, every wedding vows to last forever, until forever comes too soon. By the time Detective Samuel Hayes sat down at his desk that afternoon, the wedding photos of Marcus Bennett and Lena Brooks were already circulating online. Smiling faces, white roses, perfect lighting, the kind of image that screams fairy tale. But Hayes had learned long ago that perfect pictures usually hide the ugliest stories. Marcus and Lena had met 3 years earlier at a financial seminar at the University of Wisconsin. He was a guest speaker, confident and charismatic, talking about investment strategies and building a future. She was a business major sitting in the front row, taking notes like her life depended on it. Classmates later said she was the first to approach him after the lecture, complimenting his success, asking about internships. Within weeks, they were seen everywhere together. Expensive restaurants, charity galas, weekends at the lake. Marcus was 30 then, 10 years older than Lena. A self-made financial consultant, he'd built a reputation in Madison's business circle. Polished suits, a luxury car, and a smile that sold trust. But what people didn't know was that behind those custom suits was a man barely staying afloat. His firm was bleeding clients, a few bad investments, a handful of angry customers, and an addiction to high-stakes gambling at the Pewaukee Casino had quietly drained his accounts. He lived like a man desperate to prove he wasn't failing. Lena, on the other hand, came from the opposite world, a small apartment on the east side of the city, raised by her single mother, Patricia Brooks, a nurse who worked double shifts to keep food on the table. Patricia remembered her daughter as bright and ambitious, but after Lena's father died of cancer when she was 14, something inside her hardened. Money became her obsession. She told me once. Patricia would later say, "Love doesn't pay the bills, Mom. Stability does." To the outside world, Lena seemed like a young woman in love with a successful man. But to those who knew her best, she looked like someone chasing a ticket out of mediocrity. She was meticulous, always planning, always watching. Friends from college remembered how she'd talk about marrying rich, how she'd smile and say, "It's not gold digging if you work hard enough to deserve it." Their relationship moved fast. Dinners at rooftop bars, a trip to New York, lavish gifts Lena flaunted online. Her followers gushed over the power couple, and Marcus seemed proud to play the role. Yet, small cracks began to show. A friend of Marcus's said he'd seen them argue over a credit card statement. Another remembered Lena's reaction when Marcus mentioned losing money on a deal. Her smile froze, and she changed the subject. By the second year, Marcus proposed in the most extravagant way possible, at the very same hotel where their story would later end. He rented the Madison Grand Ballroom, filled it with candles, hired a jazz trio, and dropped to one knee in front of 100 people. Videos of the proposal went viral, captioned, "When a man loves you right." But behind the applause, Hayes later found, Marcus was already drowning in debt. The engagement ring, a 2-carat diamond, had been bought on credit. The hotel and honeymoon were booked through a client's line of credit. Every decision screamed one thing. He couldn't afford to fail, financially or emotionally. Lena didn't seem to care. Or maybe she cared too much, but only about appearances. She took charge of the wedding planning, making sure every detail screamed luxury. White orchids, crystal chandeliers, imported champagne. Patricia begged her to scale down, to have a small ceremony. Lena just laughed. "You only get married once, Mom. It has to look right." On the morning of the wedding, witnesses recalled her calmness. Not nervous, not emotional, just composed. Like a woman about to sign a deal, not start a life. Marcus, meanwhile, looked nervous but smitten, shaking hands, thanking guests. Their vows were poetic, written by Lena herself. Love is trust. Love is forever. Detective Hayes studied their pictures again. In every one, Marcus's hand reached for Lena, and in every one, her eyes never quite reached him. He leaned back in his chair, muttering to himself. He loved her. She loved the idea of him. In the official report, their relationship was summarized as stable, affectionate, no prior incidents. But Hayes knew better. What looked like a perfect match was really a ticking clock. One built on lies, pride, and the quiet hum of desperation. And by the time that clock struck midnight, someone's version of love had already turned deadly. The reception had ended in a blur of laughter, clinking glasses, and flash photography. Guests threw white petals as Marcus and Lena Bennett, husband and wife for barely 4 hours, stepped into the elevator of the Madison Grand Hotel. To everyone watching, it was a perfect ending to a perfect day. No one knew it was the last time Lena would be seen alive. Just after midnight, the 12th floor of the hotel was silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioning. The presidential suite glowed with soft yellow light, half-empty champagne glasses on the nightstand, petals scattered over the bed. Through the panoramic windows, the reflection of Lake Mendota shimmered under moonlight. It should have been romantic. Instead, it would become a crime scene. At 12:43 a.m., Maria Lopez, the hotel maid on the night shift, was passing by when she heard the first scream. At first, she told detectives, she thought it was intimacy, newlyweds. Then came a crash, the sound of glass shattering, followed by a woman's voice crying out, "Stop, please." Then silence. Maria froze. Another crash. A man shouting something about messages. Then the unmistakable thud of a body hitting the floor. Maria banged on the door, calling out for them to stop. No answer. Her hands trembled as she called security. Minutes later, Security Officer Tony Harris arrived with a master key. When they pushed the door open, the smell of spilled alcohol and sweat hit them first. The suite looked ransacked. Pillows torn, furniture overturned, shards of a broken lamp scattered across the carpet. The champagne bottle had rolled under the bed, still dripping from its mouth. And there, beside the bed, lay Lena Brooks Bennett, her nightgown shredded, a crimson halo spreading beneath her head. Her eyes were open, frozen in a mix of shock and disbelief. The side of her skull was crushed. A shattered crystal statue, a modern art piece that once decorated the nightstand, lay inches away, stained with blood and hair. Tony stepped back, whispering, "Dear God." On the floor near the body sat Marcus Bennett, in his wrinkled tuxedo shirt, staring blankly at his hands covered in blood. His lips moved, repeating the same words over and over. "She cheated on me. She cheated on me." He didn't resist when Harris approached. Didn't even flinch when the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "I saw the messages," he muttered. "She lied to me." By the time police arrived, the hotel hallway was crawling with uniforms. Detective Hayes entered the room and paused. It wasn't just the violence that struck him. It was the intimacy of it. This wasn't the chaos of a stranger's attack. This was rage, betrayal, something raw and personal. He moved through the suite slowly, taking it all in. The shattered phone on the floor, still blinking notifications. The open bottle of champagne. The blood-smeared pillow. The wedding dress hanging perfectly untouched in the corner like a ghost. Every corner told the same story. Celebration turned into carnage. "Where's the phone from?" Hayes asked, crouching beside it. "Belongs to the victim," said Sergeant Miller. "Screen's cracked but still functional. She must have been holding it when it started." The detective powered it on. The last open screen was a messaging app. The name at the top made him pause. Ethan Cole. "Who's Ethan?" "Best man," Miller replied. "We found his number saved under a heart emoji." Hayes stared at the messages. Fragments of conversation still visible through the cracked glass. "Can't wait until this is over. Tomorrow everything changes." He doesn't suspect anything. The phone slipped slightly in his glove. He looked up at the blood on the walls. "So that's what he saw," he muttered. As dawn broke, the forensics team combed every inch of the suite. They found the champagne glasses, one still half full, the other shattered, traces of fingerprints, and a faint residue that would later test positive for a strong sedative. They bagged the broken statue, the sheets, the phone, and a torn page from a small notebook found in Lena's purse. On it were 3 words written in blue ink. "Just a little more." Downstairs, Maria sat in the lobby wrapped in a hotel blanket, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I heard him shouting," she told Hayes, voice shaking. He said, "I saw the messages." And she said, "You've got it all wrong." Then there was another crash, and I knew something bad was happening. Hayes nodded, jotting it all down. "You did the right thing calling for help," he said softly, though his eyes stayed distant. Back upstairs, Marcus was being escorted out in handcuffs. Reporters were already gathering outside, shouting questions through the morning fog. Is it true the bride was cheating? Did he confess? Hayes watched the groom pass by. Once the picture of charm and success, now pale and hollow, his wedding ring smeared with dry blood. As the elevator doors closed, the detective turned back toward the suite. The cleaners would come soon. The sheets would be replaced. The blood would be scrubbed away. But the story, whatever twisted truth had unfolded behind those luxury walls, was just beginning to take shape. And as he looked at the city waking up beyond the glass, Detective Hayes knew one thing for certain. There was always more to a love story when it ended in murder. Detective Samuel Hayes didn't believe in coincidences. And in his 20 years on the job, he'd learned that love and money were the two reasons most people ended up dead. By the time the sun rose over Lake Mendota, he already suspected both. At the Madison Grand Hotel, the forensic team worked like clockwork, snapping photos, collecting fibers, bagging evidence. The champagne glasses, the bloodied statue, the torn bedsheet, all sealed and labeled. But what interested Hayes most wasn't the blood or the broken glass. It was the phone. The phone never lies. At the station, the digital forensics unit got to work. Within hours, they confirmed that Lena Brooks Bennett's phone had dozens of messages exchanged with someone named Ethan Cole, a man listed in the wedding planner's files as best man. The texts were flirty, secretive, and laced with emotional undertones. Tomorrow everything changes. We'll be free soon. He doesn't suspect anything. Hayes leaned over the lab technician's shoulder, reading them twice. Affair confirmed, he thought grimly. But something about the timestamps fell off. The messages appeared unusually consistent, sent in perfect intervals, almost automated. It wasn't enough to call them fake yet, but it was enough to raise suspicion. Meanwhile, Marcus Bennett had been formally detained. His tuxedo was taken for analysis, his hands swabbed for trace evidence. Hayes didn't expect any surprises there. Marcus had confessed, at least partially, at the scene. But there was a difference between admitting rage and proving intent. When Hayes finally entered the interrogation room, Marcus was slumped forward, eyes red, his wedding ring still on his finger. "Mr. Bennett," Hayes began evenly, "you told officers you saw messages on your wife's phone. Can you tell me what happened after that?" Marcus rubbed his temples. "I don't remember everything. She was in the shower. I picked up her phone to order champagne, and I saw them, messages from Ethan, my best friend, talking about how they were meeting behind my back, how they'd be together after the honeymoon." His voice cracked. "She came out. I confronted her. She laughed, said I was paranoid. Then she admitted it, said I was just convenient, that I paid for her dreams. I snapped. I don't remember anything after that." Hayes studied him carefully. "Did she ever seem afraid of you?" Marcus's eyes flickered with confusion. "Afraid? No. If anything, I was the one afraid of her." When Hayes left the room, he wasn't convinced. Not yet. Rage killings were messy, emotional, but this one felt like it had more layers. He needed to understand who Lena really was, beyond the Instagram-perfect bride. That afternoon, Hayes drove across town to a modest brick apartment building on the east side. Patricia Brooks answered the door, Lena's mother. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her expression was sharp, almost defiant. "I knew this would happen," she said, ushering him in. "Not the murder, God no, but tragedy. My daughter, she was clever, too clever for her own good." "Tell me about her," Hayes said, taking a seat at the kitchen table. Patricia poured herself a glass of water, hands trembling slightly. Lena was brilliant, ambitious, but after her father died, something in her changed. She decided money was the only way to feel safe. When she met Marcus, I told her he seemed too good to be true. She said, "That's the point." Did she love him? Patricia gave a bitter laugh. She loved what he represented. Success, comfort, escape. But love. She shook her head. Lena wasn't built for love anymore. Hayes took notes silently, then asked, Did she ever mention Ethan Cole? That name made Patricia freeze. Ethan? Yes. I saw them once, months ago, at a cafe downtown. They were sitting close, whispering. Lena didn't see me. When I asked her later, she said they were planning a surprise for Marcus. I didn't believe it, but I wanted to. Hayes thanked her and stood. Before leaving, Patricia stopped him at the door. Detective, she said softly, Marcus may have killed her, but don't think for a second she was innocent. Back at headquarters, Hayes pulled Marcus's financial records. What he found painted a new picture. 3 maxed-out credit cards. Mortgage 2 months overdue. Large withdrawals from personal accounts leading directly to casinos. And, perhaps most damning, $60,000 spent on the wedding, paid through a client's business line of credit. Hayes leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. Marcus wasn't just a jealous husband. He was a desperate man drowning in debt. But desperation doesn't always end in murder. Sometimes it invites manipulation. He asked his junior partner, Detective Alicia Vega, to check if Lena had any financial assets, insurance, or hidden accounts. Vega returned within the hour. Nothing under her legal name, she said, but we found recurring deposits from a brokerage account, roughly $5,000 every month for the past 6 months. Origin unknown. Hayes frowned. A student making thousands in dividends? Doesn't add up. By sunset, he returned to the hotel suite for one last walkthrough. The room was quiet now, stripped of chaos, the bed remade, the scent of cleaning chemicals replacing blood. But Hayes could still feel the echoes, the tension, the betrayal. He stared out the window at the lake shimmering beneath the fading light. She was playing a game, he murmured to himself. And Marcus wasn't her only player. Behind him, the forensic photographer zipped the case closed. Think it's just a crime of passion, detective? Hayes didn't answer. His gut already knew the truth. Passion may have pulled the trigger, but greed had loaded the gun. Detective Samuel Hayes didn't sleep that night. Cases like this, the kind that started with love and ended with blood, never let him. The deeper he dug, the less it looked like a spontaneous act of rage, and more like a web of betrayal carefully spun around a desperate man. By sunrise, the forensics team had finished the initial phone extraction. The data confirmed what Hayes suspected. Lena Brooks Bennett and Ethan Cole weren't just friends. They'd been lovers for at least a year. Hundreds of photos, messages, and secret meetups across Madison painted a story of 2 people who shared more than chemistry. They shared a plan. The earliest messages were romantic. I miss you. He's out again. I can't wait until we don't have to hide. But as the months went by, they became transactional. He's drowning in debt. We just need to push a little more. Once I marry him, we'll be free. Hayes scrolled through the exchanges, his expression hardening. Lena wasn't just having an affair. She was playing Marcus for his money. A few hours later, Detective Alicia Vega burst into his office, holding a printed report. You'll want to see this, she said, dropping the papers on his desk. Financial traces from Lena's accounts. Turns out she was funneling money from Marcus into a brokerage under her maiden name. Small amounts every week, but it adds up, around $25,000 total. Hayes whistled softly. So, while he thought he was paying for her future, she was quietly building her escape fund. But the part that really caught his attention came at the bottom of the report. A one-way plane ticket booked to the Caribbean. Departure date 1 week after the wedding. Passenger name, Lena Brooks, not Bennett. 1 ticket. Vega said, no return flight. And no booking for Marcus or Ethan. Interesting, Hayes murmured. Looks like Mrs. Bennett was planning her honeymoon alone. By noon, they had enough to bring Ethan Cole in for questioning. Except Ethan had vanished. He hadn't shown up for work at the high school where he taught math, and his phone was off. A search warrant for his apartment turned up even more. A packed suitcase missing, drawers left open, and in the trash, half-burned documents that once bore the letterhead of Marcus's financial firm. In the middle of the mess, Hayes spotted something that made his chest tighten. A framed photo of Ethan and Lena, smiling in front of the university library, arms around each other. Scribbled on the back were the words, "Forever starts soon." A neighbor peeked out as detectives worked. "You looking for Ethan?" she asked. "I saw him leave early this morning. Big suitcase. Looked upset. He's been seeing this young woman lately. Tall braids, real pretty. They argued a lot. Last thing I heard her say was, 'He can never know.'" "He who?" Hayes asked. The woman shrugged. Didn't hear the rest, but she looked scared. Back at headquarters, Hayes stared at the evidence board. Photos of the wedding, the suite, Lena's body, Marcus's mugshot, Ethan's ID. Strings of red yarn connected their faces. In the center, he pinned a single note in thick black ink. Motive, greed plus betrayal. Hours later, his phone buzzed. It was Ray Simmons, the forensic tech. "Detective, you want to come down here?" There's something off about those messages on Lena's phone, the ones Marcus supposedly saw before the murder. When Hayes arrived, Ray was already scrolling through metadata logs. "See this?" Some of the texts between Lena and Ethan were time-stamped when her phone was offline. No network connection. And these apps' signatures, they don't match the default messaging system. It looks like they were fabricated. Hayes finished for him. "Exactly. Someone used a fake chat generator. It's good. Looks real if you're not checking under the hood. My guess? They were planted for Marcus to find." Hayes frowned. So the messages that sent him into a rage weren't even real. "Not all of them," Ray said. "But the older ones, those were legit. They were together, no question about that." Hayes rubbed his temples. "So she had an affair, planned a con, then staged fake messages to make sure her husband would explode. The only thing missing is why." Later that evening, Hayes met again with Patricia Brooks, Lena's mother. Her apartment smelled faintly of disinfectant and grief. "She told me she was going to be rich," Patricia said softly, clutching a photo of Lena in her graduation gown. "Said her life was finally turning around. I asked her how, but she just smiled and said, 'It's boring, Mom. You wouldn't understand.'" Hayes hesitated, then asked, "Mrs. Brooks, did your daughter ever mention being pregnant?" Patricia went pale. "Yes. She told me a week before the wedding. Said she was 2 months along. But it wasn't Marcus's child. It was Ethan's." Hayes exhaled. "Did she plan to tell him?" "She said she'd tell Marcus it was his, that it would make the marriage stronger, or at least more profitable. I begged her to stop, to call it off, but she laughed. Said she finally learned to play by the same rules men use." When Hayes returned to the station, Vega had more news. "We traced Ethan's debit card. He used it at a motel upstate this morning. Room 12, Pine Creek Inn." "Let's go," Hayes said, grabbing his coat. When they arrived, the door was unlocked. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. His eyes were bloodshot, face unshaven. When he saw the badge, he didn't run. "She's dead, isn't she?" he whispered. Hayes nodded. "You want to tell me what really happened?" Ethan buried his face in his hands. "She said it would all be worth it. That after the wedding, we'd disappear with his money. But she changed, became cold, controlling. I tried to back out, but she threatened to ruin me. She said if I talked, she'd tell everyone I forced her into it." "So you ran?" Hayes said. "I loved her," Ethan murmured. "But she wasn't the girl I met. By the end, she was playing everyone, even me." Hayes watched him silently. The case that started as a murder passion was turning into something darker. A love triangle built on deceit, manipulation, and a woman whose ambition had finally consumed her. And as he looked at Ethan trembling on the edge of the bed, Hayes realized something chilling. Lena's death wasn't just a crime of emotion. It was the inevitable collapse of a plan so twisted. It had left every person involved bleeding one way or another. Detective Samuel Hayes stared at the motel wall, where Ethan Cole had just finished confessing. The wallpaper was peeling. The air smelled of whiskey and stale cigarettes, and the man sitting across from him looked like someone who'd aged 10 years overnight. Hayes had seen guilt before, but not like this. Ethan's eyes were hollow, as if the woman he loved had taken every last piece of him to the grave. "She was going to destroy me," Ethan muttered. "When I told her I couldn't go through with it, she laughed. Said I didn't have the guts, that she'd tell everyone I took advantage of her." Hayes leaned forward. Why go through with the wedding at all? Because she said it was too late, Ethan whispered. She said the money was already in motion, that Marcus was about to transfer everything for the honeymoon. She was going to marry him, drug him, make him look unfaithful, then divorce him and take a settlement. I thought she was bluffing until she showed me the prenup. The prenup? Ethan nodded. It looked fair on the surface, but there was a clause. If Marcus was caught cheating or proven unfaithful, she'd get a massive payout. She planned the entire thing, even the fake texts. I didn't help her write them, but she showed me the app. Said she wanted to make sure Marcus exploded. Said it would make the divorce faster and cleaner. Hayes exhaled, staring at the trembling man in front of him. And the pregnancy? Ethan froze, then nodded slowly. She told me about it a week before the wedding. Said it was mine, but that Marcus would think it was his. I wanted to tell him the truth, but she said if I did, she'd ruin me. She had everything saved. Screenshots, emails, messages. She said one accusation, and my teaching career would be over. Hayes stood, pacing the room. You realize how this looks, Ethan? You were part of the scam. You helped her plan it. I know, Ethan said quietly, and I'll pay for it. But I didn't kill her, detective. I swear to God I didn't touch her. For a moment, Hayes believed him. The fear in Ethan's voice didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded raw, broken. He signaled to the uniformed officers waiting outside. Take him in, get him a lawyer, and make sure he doesn't run again. Back at headquarters, Hayes spread the new evidence across his desk. The fake texts, the prenup clause, the flight ticket, the hidden account, the positive pregnancy test from Lena's apartment. All the threads were finally connecting, but the pattern that emerged wasn't just greed. It was control. Lena Brooks hadn't just wanted Marcus's money. She'd wanted power. She'd manipulated two men into orbiting her ambitions, promising both of them love, while planning to use one to destroy the other. Still, something didn't fit. If she had everything planned, why end up dead? Why provoke Marcus that night if she could have walked away rich? Unless, Hayes thought, she'd never planned to walk away with Marcus at all. Maybe she'd planned to leave with something else. That evening, Hayes called Ray Simmons, a forensic tech. I need you to dig deeper into those encrypted emails we pulled from Lena's phone. Everything you can find, attachments, drafts, deleted threads. Ray called back an hour later, his tone tense. You're going to want to sit down for this, detective. We found a second folder in her cloud storage, hidden under a false directory. It contains financial spreadsheets, client lists, and transaction histories from Marcus's firm. Stuff he shouldn't have shared with anyone. Looks like she was copying his files. Hayes' pulse quickened. So she wasn't just after a divorce settlement. She was stealing corporate data. Exactly. And get this, Ray continued. She'd been in contact with a rival investment firm, Briarstone Capital. There are emails negotiating payments for confidential client information. We traced a $10,000 deposit to her secret brokerage account 3 days before the wedding. Hayes rubbed his face. So she was playing both sides, using Marcus for marriage, Ethan for cover, and a third man for money. Ray hesitated. There's one more thing. DNA from the fetus came back. It's not Marcus's, and it's not Ethan's either. For a few seconds, Hayes just stared at the wall, letting the weight of it settle. So, who the hell was she really sleeping with? That's what we're trying to find out, Ray said. But whoever he is, he's connected to Briarstone. Their CEO, Jonathan Hale, met with her twice last month, according to security footage from a cafe downtown. Hayes leaned back in his chair. She was playing 3 men at once, and thought she could get away with it. The next morning, Hayes visited Marcus in county jail. The man looked worse. Pale, unshaven, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. Still, he seemed clearer than before. Marcus, Hayes said, sliding a folder across the table. You deserve to know what we've learned. Marcus flipped through the documents slowly. The emails, the photos of Lena and Ethan, the financial records. His hand shook. She was going to ruin me, he whispered. Use me, take my money, and then disappear. Hayes nodded. But you were drugged. She put sedatives in your champagne, probably to make you drowsy, make the argument easier to control. We found traces in your bloodstream. But when you saw those messages, the plan backfired. Marcus pressed his palms to his eyes. I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to tell me the truth. She laughed, said I'd been nothing but her project. He broke off, voice cracking. And now she's gone. And I'm the monster. Hayes didn't answer. In truth, there are no heroes left in this story, only victims of their own lies. That night, back in his office, Hayes looked at Lena's wedding photo again. The perfect bride, smiling at the camera, veil glowing in soft light. A woman who had convinced everyone, even the men she betrayed, that she was worth loving. He pinned one final note to the evidence board. Lena Brooks, victim, manipulator, architect of her own destruction. And beneath it, he wrote what had become the case's unspoken truth. When love becomes a transaction, everyone eventually pays a price. The trial of Marcus Bennett began 6 months after the wedding night murder that had turned Madison's high society upside down. For weeks, the headlines refused to die. Bride's death in presidential suite, love, lies, and blood money. The perfect wedding that ended in murder. Every news outlet painted its own version of the story. A scorned husband, a manipulative wife, and a secret affair that had spiraled into tragedy. But for Detective Samuel Hayes, who sat quietly in the back row of the courtroom, the truth was far more complicated than any headline could capture. Marcus entered the courtroom in a gray suit, thinner than before, the spark of arrogance once in his posture replaced by exhaustion. Across from him, the prosecution displayed photos of the crime scene on a large screen. The broken lamp, the bloodied carpet, the twisted veil. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. Lena Brooks Bennett had been young, beautiful, ambitious. And now, she was a ghost haunting the courtroom walls. The prosecutor, David Lynn, painted Marcus as a jealous, violent man. He couldn't stand the thought of losing control, Lynn said, voice ringing through the room. When he saw the messages on his wife's phone, he didn't hesitate. He beat her until she couldn't breathe. Then, instead of calling for help, he sat beside her body, calm, cold, and satisfied. But the defense attorney, Carla Monroe, fought back with a quiet ferocity. She called the marriage what it truly was, a trap. My client was not a predator, she said. He was a victim of deceit. Mrs. Bennett manipulated 2 men for money, and when she tried to drug him to secure her escape, she triggered a tragedy that neither of them could stop. Hayes watched as the courtroom divided itself. Half pitted Marcus, the other half despised him. Forensic evidence helped shape the narrative. A toxicologist testified that a high dose of sedatives had been found in Marcus's system, enough to impair his motor functions and memory. A digital expert explained how the fair messages on Lena's phone had been partially fabricated using a fake chat app meant to provoke jealousy. Then came Ethan Cole. He looked nothing like the charming best man from the wedding photos. His career as a teacher already destroyed, his name dragged through the press. Under oath, he admitted his affair with Lena, but insisted he hadn't been part of her death. She used me, he said, voice trembling. She told me she loved me, but she was planning to ruin us both. I thought I could stop her, but I didn't. The prosecutor pressed hard. And you expect us to believe that you, a grown man, had no idea she was planning a scam? Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I knew, but I was too scared to walk away. And now she's gone. Detective Hayes was called to the stand next. He laid out the investigation clearly and calmly. The financial evidence, the fake messages, the plane ticket, the traces of sedatives, the secret files stolen from Marcus's firm. Every word painted Lena as more than a victim, as a mastermind of a plan that collapsed under its own weight. Still, Hayes didn't flinch when the prosecutor asked, Detective, in your opinion, was this premeditated murder or a crime of passion? Hayes paused. It was both, he said finally. It was a collision of 2 people who lied to each other until there was nothing left but anger. Mr. Bennett struck the fatal blows, but Mrs. Bennett lit the match. That answer hung heavy in the air. Even the judge seemed to take a slow breath before continuing. Over 2 weeks of testimony, the courtroom turned into a theater of tragedy. Patricia Brooks, Lena's mother, testified through tears. "I lost my daughter long before she died," she said softly. "The girl who wanted love disappeared when she decided that money meant more." When Marcus took the stand, the entire room fell silent. He spoke in a low voice, shaking slightly as he described the final moments. "She laughed at me," he said I was pathetic, said she never loved me, that I was just a bank account with a pulse. I remember grabbing something heavy. Then it all went black. When I woke up, she was gone, and I knew I'd lost everything, including myself. There were no outbursts, no dramatics, just a broken man facing the ruin of his own making. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for nearly 8 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. Verdict: guilty of manslaughter in the first degree. Marcus exhaled, his shoulders slumping. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't life in prison either. The judge, citing the sedatives in his system and Lena's clear manipulation, sentenced him to 7 years in state prison. As reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, Detective Hayes stepped outside into the cold evening air. He overheard one journalist say, "Guess love really can kill." He almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. Inside, Ethan Cole was given a suspended sentence for conspiracy and fraud, though his teaching license was permanently revoked. He left the courthouse without looking back. For Patricia, there was no victory. She simply walked past the cameras, clutching her daughter's photograph, whispering something Hayes could barely hear. "Rest now, baby. Maybe now you finally stopped lying." When the courtroom lights dimmed and the case files were sealed, Hayes sat alone in his car for a long time, the echo of the judge's gavel still ringing in his head. He thought about the perfect wedding photos, the smiles of vows, the promise of forever. And then he thought about how, in the end, forever had lasted exactly 7 hours. The courthouse emptied weeks ago, but for Detective Samuel Hayes, the case refused to fade. Some cases do that. They follow you home, sit in the passenger seat of your car, whisper in your ear while you're trying to sleep. The Bennett case was one of them, a murder born out of love, greed, and pride. And no matter how neatly the court tied it up with a sentence and a gavel, it still felt unfinished. The Madison Grand Hotel had long since cleaned the suite where it happened. Fresh linens, new furniture, a new plaque outside the door that now read Lakeview Luxury. Guests checked in, laughed, toasted anniversaries. No one would ever guess that this was the same room where a young woman had died in her wedding night dress, or that the faint discoloration in the carpet hid what couldn't be fully erased: blood, rage, regret. Hayes sometimes drove past the hotel after work. He told himself it was coincidence, that it was on his route home. But he always slowed down when he reached the marble entrance, watching the valet open doors for smiling couples stepping out in tuxedos and gowns. For them, love was still something pure, untouched by deceit. He wondered how long that illusion would last. Marcus Bennett was serving his 7-year sentence at Fox Lake Correctional, a mid-level security facility outside Madison. In prison, he kept to himself, reading books on finance and occasionally giving budgeting advice to other inmates. When Hayes visited him months later, Marcus looked older but steadier, a man learning to live with quiet. "I replay that night every day," Marcus said, eyes fixed on the wall. "There's a moment before everything snapped. If I had just walked out of that room, she'd still be alive. I could have started over." Hayes folded his hands. "You were manipulated, Marcus. She planned to destroy you." Marcus nodded faintly. "Maybe, but I still made the choice. Love doesn't excuse violence, Detective. It just makes it messier." There was a long silence before he added, "I read the report about the other man, the CEO. Guess I was never even the main character in her story." Hayes didn't respond. There was no comfort worth offering. Marcus had already lost everything worth saving: his freedom, his career, his marriage, his illusions. Across town, Ethan Cole packed up what was left of his life into a single car. The court had given him probation, but public opinion had given him exile. The school fired him. Parents whispered. His friends stopped calling. Before he left Wisconsin, he wrote Hayes a letter, hand-signed, almost apologetic. "I used to believe love could fix broken people. Now I think love just helps them hide their cracks a little longer. She wasn't a monster, Detective, just Empty. And I was stupid enough to think I could fill that emptiness. No return address. Just his name and one final line. Tell her mother I'm sorry. Meanwhile, Patricia Brooks had turned her grief into quiet penance. She sold most of her belongings, moved into a smaller apartment, and began volunteering at a women's shelter downtown. Every Wednesday night, she helped women escaping abusive relationships fill out restraining orders and find places to stay. She rarely talked about her daughter, but when she did, her words carried a weary honesty. Lena thought power would make her safe, she told Hayes one evening when he visited. She thought as she controlled everyone around her, she could never be hurt again. But control isn't safety. It's just another kind of prison. She paused, staring at the photo of Lena on the mantel. Graduation cap, wide smile, eyes full of calculation that only a mother could recognize in hindsight. You know what the hardest part is? Patricia said quietly. Even now, I still love her. After everything, I still love her. Maybe that's what being a mother means, loving someone who's long stopped deserving it. Hayes didn't argue. Some truths didn't need to be analyzed, only carried. In the months that followed, he closed other cases, solved other murders. But every so often, when a young detective joined the force, he'd tell them the story. Not for the gore, not for the scandal, but for the lesson. People think murder comes from hate, he'd say. But most of the time, it comes from love twisted into something unrecognizable. Greed, betrayal, pride, they all start where love once lived. One rainy evening, he sat in his office, finishing paperwork before heading home. The file on his desk was stamped case closed. Yet, as thunder rolled outside, he found himself reopening it, flipping through photos of the suite, Lena's phone, Marcus's confession. On the back page, his own handwriting stared back at him from a note he'd written months ago. She wasn't killed because she cheated. She was killed because she thought she could play God in a game where everyone bleeds. He slid the file into the drawer and turned off the light. But before leaving, he lingered at the window, watching rain wash over the city. Somewhere out there, couples were fighting, making up, lying, forgiving, all thinking their stories were different. Hayes knew better. As he walked down the empty corridor, he thought about Lena, a woman too ambitious for love, too clever for her own survival. He thought about Marcus, who mistook devotion for possession, and Ethan, who confused guilt with affection. 3 people, 1 tragedy, and a reminder that no one truly wins when love turns into leverage. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Hayes pulled his coat tighter and stepped into the night. Madison's lights glimmered on the wet pavement, beautiful, deceptive, fragile. He paused for a moment, glancing back at the police headquarters before whispering to himself. They said it was a wedding tragedy, but it wasn't about marriage at all. It was about what happens when love becomes currency, and everyone keeps spending until there's nothing left. Then he walked away, disappearing into the blur of city lights, another detective carrying another ghost that would never quite let him go.